right, Josh, it is great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for coming on. I've enjoyed kind of getting to know you since we've done that panel. And I think you have a really interesting story and background. And I think there's going to be a lot of great information in this podcast. Would you mind kind of giving a brief introduction of yourself and Leafplanner?
Sure. Thanks, Mark. And I very much enjoyed getting to know you as well. The panel was a lot of fun. And thank you again for having me on the podcast. So I think we'll get into a little bit later, maybe the story behind Leaf Planner itself. So I'll do more of a kind of surface level. But I started my career as a lawyer, mostly corporate and securities kind of work in Chicago. And then for reasons that I'm sure we're going to get into, ended up transitioning into a family office role with my family, which was is a three generation, three branch family. And so kind of had a family office career in there, which I still do. And then decided that I really liked helping other families. And so started a small consulting practice helping other families as well. And then Leaf Planner is sort of the latest iteration that brings many of these things together, as I'll hopefully describe in a few minutes. And Leaf Planner itself is really the idea of creating an owner's manual for a family, or a mind map, if you will, of all the things that families really need to know. So think about executors and trustees and rising gen family members and spouses and partners and outside advisors, all of whom have some piece of the puzzle, but nobody except usually, well, I'll actually say nobody has the full puzzle, because there's always information sharing between different people, whether that's spouses and partners, whether that's property managers or chief financial officers or executive assistants, or again, outside trustees, executors, and advisors, and all these things. And so Leaf Planner is really a platform designed to help families bring all of that information together, share it, learn from it, look for blind spots, educate family members, manage workflows, and then ultimately, of course, really efficiently manage successions and transitions.
Um, I'd love to talk to founders about their founder journey, especially when it's kind of born out of an experience within the family office. You don't see it often. It can be difficult to commercialize products, as you know, that the software business is a bit of a messy business, and you don't normally fit the mold of a young entrepreneur. So I'd love to hear about your founder's journey and how you kind of started Leaf Planner. Why did you start Leaf Planner? What was the experience like? And then also just kind of looking back on your kind of founder's journey. What have you learned?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So obviously, I don't know if we never talked about whether there's a video component to this or not. And so anybody who maybe sees me, obviously, will see quickly that I am not the young 30-year-old entrepreneur. Probably don't sound like it either. So to your point, it's definitely a different journey coming at this much later in life than earlier in life. And I'm not the serial entrepreneur who's just been doing this over and over again. So I mentioned the idea of the owner's manual a second ago, and I know you've already heard this joke, but hopefully your listeners have not. And remembering the old adage of you get an owner's manual with a toaster and not with a kid. And about 25 years ago, as I said, I was practicing corporate and securities law, and we found out fairly suddenly, I mean, these things are always unexpected, right? But we found out suddenly that my dad, who at the time was 70, had cancer and was going to die. And I would say my dad was kind of the quintessential patriarch of the family. He was a brilliant tax lawyer, world renowned, represented a fascinating set of characters in multi-generational wealth and in different industries and across America and across the world, and then had turned into the venture capital business. And so we had a wildly complicated balance sheet. We had a wildly complicated enterprise structure. We were filing 750 tax returns a year. We had a small staff of accountants who were doing nothing but file those tax returns. We were embroiled in what would end up turning into a 33-year battle with the Internal Revenue Service that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. Just really, a mess and a half. And finding out all of a sudden, of course, again, that my dad had cancer and was going to pass away, I left my private practice to come essentially help my family figure out how do we navigate through all of this. And in that process, and I've got, I mentioned we're three branches. So I've got a brother and a sister, and my mom was still alive at the time as well. And as we went through this process, I ended up spending 18 months with my dad. I'm a trained lawyer. I took his estate planning class in law school, which is a huge mistake for a whole host of reasons, but nevertheless, I did, and ended up again with that 18 months with him. I would say most families don't have somebody with the capacity that I do, and I don't mean that obviously egotistically. It's just by
Right.
luck of training. And most families don't get 18 months of notice and time to prepare for these things. And yet, I was really in the dark. And so realizing that I was in the dark, and if I was in the dark, what did that say about my mom, my sister, my brother, my wife? My kids weren't born yet, but ultimately my kids. And what does that really say? And so one of my first reflections was there's got to be a better way to do this. And so we started building for our family now, I guess it's 23 years ago, an owner's manual. And the idea again was how do you better educate family members, engage them, empower them? How do you bring together what do we do? How do we do it? Where do we do it? Who do we do it with? Why do we do it that way? So I'm sure, you certainly are familiar with the olden case of emergency file. And those are great. Like I jokingly or disparagingly sometimes say, that's cute, but those are great. You should have that. But that's only going to get you so far as opposed to all the context and emotional intelligence that goes into these things. And so that's what we built for our family. And then did this for a host of other families through my consulting career. And ultimately, really one of these kind of happenstance conversations at lunch one day, and somebody said to me, "Why don't you turn that into a platform? There's nothing like it in the industry." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's a cool idea." And fortunately, I had a colleague at lunch with me because I would have, again, being at that time I was 59, so I would have easily said, "Oh, that's a cute idea. I should do that," and then that would have been the end of that conversation. And a colleague at lunch really kind of pushed me to do it. And so that became Leafplanner. So it's now this platform that's been live for, I guess we're about 3.5 years with clients. And the goal is to help as many families as we can and let them kind of go through the same process.
Yeah, I really do think Leaf Planner is unique. I mean, do you have a sense of what kind of category it would fit in? I don't know if it does, but do you?
It's an interesting question. To some extent, I kind of think we're creating a category. And when I say that, I mean I don't. It's hard to obviously say that there's so many things out there. So I would say we're not really strictly a digital vault. Obviously, there's a million digital vault products, whether they're specialized products or whether they're the box and Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or any of these kinds of things. We're part digital vault, we're part CRM, we're part relational database. So ultimately, I would say no, there's nothing really specifically like it. What I like to, if I had to define the category, I guess we've gotten used to there being this idea of data aggregation, which typically, in my view, means portfolio reporting or financial aggregation, whether that's
Yeah.
on the GL side or the portfolio side. I look at Leaf Planner as sort of being the corollary to that is information aggregation. And so it's really everything about your family, again, all of that context and bringing it all together in a single source of truth.
That makes sense. Who is your ideal client profile?
So that's a really difficult question for us to answer because I think when we look at our client base right now, and again, we've been around for about 3.5 years, so we're starting to really see some trends in kind of who our clients are. But the reality is, it's all across the board. We see everything from kind of the mom and dad and some kids in the high net worth category. Certainly, an abundance of families that are in sort of the ultra high net worth category, and then even really significant $1 billion plus family offices. So to me, the common denominator, if you will, is about complexity, and it's really about a desire again to kind of educate family members and to for people who are again I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but a little bit more self aware of the problems that families are going to face when there's multi generational wealth at stake, and so again, I really look at it as a complexity issue, but it really is anywhere in kind of the sub $10 million net worth range all the way to the $1 billion plus range, just depending upon the circumstances that family is facing.
Yeah, it doesn't take a whole lot of significant wealth that had that complexity, right? In terms of multiple properties, accounts, different legal agreements. I mean, my wife just settled her mother's estate through probate, and it wasn't a complicated estate, but still, it's a process and it's complicated, and
Yeah.
you don't actually know where everything. And she had a chance to plan with her mother. A lot of folks don't have that opportunity like you
Yeah.
did or she did, and are suddenly left with trying to figure out what's going on. Well, what are some, without naming names, kind of how wealth transfer could kind of go wrong, and how, maybe a client success story or two with how Leaf Planner has helped kind of prevent some of those horror stories?
Yeah. So it really is. Again, it's the stories are all across the board. We've seen family offices use Leaf Planner as a transition tool between a retiring executive and an incoming executive. There have been a couple of instances of that that's been super cool. And there's one family in particular, one family office in particular that every time I see him, the incoming guy, keeps telling me how much it accelerated the learning curve for him as he came in, which is so great. We've seen rising gen family members take on Leaf Planner as a wealth engagement tool. I think families of wealth, obviously, as you well know, are sitting around often thinking about how do we engage the kids in this wealth. And sometimes that may be putting the kids on an investment committee, and sometimes it may be doing this, that, or the other, or getting them involved in philanthropy or some different aspect of what the family is up to. But this was an instant or a couple instances where a rising gen family member again kind of took on building the Leaf Plan as their engagement. And then we've really seen a lot of things that are, as you said, really the roadblocks or mistakes or problems that come up. So whether that's just finding documentation, although again, I don't want to emphasize the value of that. I mean, any digital vault will do that, but the reality is, family members who have come across, oh, we can't find the healthcare power of attorney, or we can't find this, or we can't find that. So there's that aspect to it. There's been a lot of, I'll say again, built into the emotional intelligence that can really cover a lot of different ground. That may be explaining, in my family, there's three kids, at my generation, I'm one of three, right? And so I was named executor and trustee and power of attorney. And to some extent, there was an obvious understanding of why that was the case, right? I'm the trained lawyer. I spent the 18 months with my dad, et cetera. Um, but often we're looking at a situation where a family or maybe the matriarch and patriarch haven't described why did you choose this kid as this thing and that kid as that thing. And by the way, kid number three wasn't named as anything at all. And those are the things that really hurt feelings and leave problems between
Yeah.
siblings, or the time that goes into these things, as you said, just the administrative burden of probate. I can't imagine how many hundreds of thousands of dollars I spent on administrative BS on my dad's estate. That had I had a Leaf Plan to be able to say, boom, here it is, and I understand all these pieces, how much simpler that would have been. So all kinds of different things. One last example, I guess I give you, for example, I talk all the time about we've got a really significant spread in our relationship between the two major auction houses in our family, are big art collectors. And, you can imagine that that's got a lot of value to it at the end of the day. And I don't know how many people in the family know that. And so again, if I'm not here and somebody is selling some of the artwork in the family collection, and they go to the wrong auction house, there's 24% down the toilet that they didn't know they were sending down the toilet. So it's again, there're just all these different kinds of things to think about that you don't think about until it's too late, right? And then you're in the throes of making decisions. I think there's some psychological stuff around. You don't make major decisions within 90 days of a trauma. Somebody said to me recently, I love this quote: "Don't make decisions at dusk. It's the time when you think you can see everything, but you can't." And I thought that was really like a brilliant phrase for kind of when we're
Yeah.
typically put into these situations to make decisions.
It's that context, as you talked about, right? Like
Yeah.
once the family member has passed, it you don't have a chance to understand that context unless it's been documented in some
Yep.
sort of way. I think obviously American culture has a tough time with two things: talking about death and money. Um, how can the next gen be better prepared? What are you seeing as in terms of the work that you've done with families in terms of when should these conversations begin with the next gen? How can these conversations be more productive? And how do you bring along that next gen?
Yeah. So the good news I'd say is, in our lifetimes, right, over the last 2, 3, maybe even 4 decades, the trend has been towards certainly more transparency, more conversation. Money is kind of coming out of the closet, if you will, and we can talk about it a little bit better. There still are families that I'll come across where the 96-year-old patriarch is like, my kids can find out when I'm dead and all that kind of stuff. That still exists, but it's not nearly as prevalent, obviously, as it was in prior generations. And, given all the work that Jay Hughes and so many others have done on talking about these issues and getting families to talk about these issues, that's really opened up, I think, that conversation. But to your point as well, still nobody wants to talk about their death. Nobody wants to face mortality. So I think the more positive you can, or the more you can approach these issues from a position of I'll say positivity, as that sounds like hoity-toity, whatever, but is that think about it through education. Think about it through really, I want my kids to know what they're going to have to be dealing with. I want them to be good stewards. I don't want this to land in their laps and ruin their lives, like all those kinds of things, right? So thinking about it much more from a positive psychology kind of standpoint. Uh, and then often we have, especially with Leafplanner, we've got rising gen family members who realize, to your point, like you mentioned your mom's probate, right? And we know that we're the ones who are now I'm the senior generation, right? Suddenly we became the senior generation. So those kids know they're the ones who are going to have to step into this and sort it all out. And they understand the complexity, and they understand that there's wealth, and they understand they're going to have to do it at a time when they've got their own careers, their own kids, their own homes, their own lives, their own everything. And I gave up 10 years of my life to come have to do this, right? So uh, a lot of these conversations are starting, I think, with that next generation saying, hey, I want to be educated about this because I want to be a good steward, or I want to be able to efficiently run this process when it happens. So again, to me, I think if you can start these conversations from a position that it's about communication, it's about education, it's about engagement and empowerment, and it's not just about death, that's super, super powerful to me. The families that do this the best, from my perspective, do this for decades before there's a death. And it's really not that's an end result, but that wasn't the driving force or the driving factor in why the family was having those conversations.
Yeah. Sometimes you hear about these families and they're, the patriarch and matriarch are not letting the kids know about the situation at all. Where the kids they kind of know that they're not like everybody else, that there is
Right.
significant wealth in the family, but they don't have these honest communication and help prepare them for these type of events.
Yeah.
Um, it's really, like I said, it's some of it's just cultural, right? It's just so hard for
Yeah.
to have those kind of conversations. But I think that's great advice to try to
And
make it.
and there, by the way, I would say, it's interesting because one, I'm often saying to families, and I kind of think that this should have passed already with the internet age, but that for the families that do think their kids don't know, like you're saying, really, right? I mean, there's this thing called Google. It's been around for a little while. Now there's ChatGPT and everything else, right? And I mean, I asked ChatGPT for my own history, and I mean, I was blown away by what it told me about myself, right? Um, Zillow, and kids can look up obviously what their homes are worth, and it's
Yeah.
not like they can't look up what first class tickets, or God forbid your family's flying around in a private jet. So
If
I'm
your
often
dad has a
telling
Wikipedia
families,
page, maybe that's a clue, right?
yeah, exactly, right. So I'm often telling families to really be careful about how much they think. And by the way, kids guessing wrong, whether they're guessing wrong up or down, both have dangers.
Yeah.
And so, and the other thing that I talk to families a lot about is the idea that transparency is not a binary topic, right? And I think that a lot of families come into a transparency conversation and think transparency means I tell my kids nothing, or I'm showing them the balance sheet. And I am often having conversation with families, and I think Leaf Planner is an interesting play into that. That transparency can be a lot about structure. It can be about understanding financial literacy. You can do a lot of things between nothing and showing them the balance sheet.
Right.
And that continuum of transparency doesn't have to be totally binary. So I hope families will think about that and share more, even if it's just from that education standpoint, and not put numbers on it if it's inappropriate at that particular time for the kids or whatever.
I think that's good advice. You serve both families directly, and you serve wealth managers, so kind of a B2B channel as a B2C channel. Can you talk to me a little bit about how the challenges that you have are just like, being able to service both those channels as an entrepreneur?
Sure. I mean, I think for us and with Leafplanner, it's been an interesting journey of learning, I guess, about what are the pain points on both sides of that wall, if you will, and also what's really the value proposition. I think we really well understood from the outset what the value proposition was on that family or the B2C side, the family office.
You lived
And
it.
I lived it, right? And that's the
Yeah.
world I've lived in for the last 25 years, either for myself or with other families. So I watched it. I think on the B2B side, it took us, I think we're a little behind in understanding that value proposition story, but I think we really do see it. And especially in today's day and age, when so many wealth advisors are moving toward the multifamily office or the fractional family office model and want to offer a family office service kind of offering. And particularly because, to some extent, there's a race to the bottom on AUM fees, right? I mean, it's been going on for decades. And so wealth advisors are seeing the need for, there was just another article a couple days ago I saw that was about inheritors firing their parents' wealth advisors, right? The cost of acquisition is a lot different than the cost of retention.
And
And
it's so
so,
common, right? I think it's like 75-80% do it.
yeah,
So
yeah. So if we can show a value proposition around deeper conversations and deeper relationships with your client, getting to that next generation and establishing that relationship, having a more holistic picture. If you're going to hang the words family office services on your website, do you really know how to deliver it? And can we help you deliver it? So a lot of those different kind of value propositions are somewhat different than the B2C side, but I think we're serving it well. We're getting really good reception on that side of the wall as well. It just has been it's a little bit of a different pain point and a different value proposition that we've had to come to understand.
different buyer, obviously, but I just think, to your point, if you're going to be a true wealth manager or family office, as you know, that those terms get used and abused, this is such a critical component that people are looking for their advisor to be kind of a life coach in a lot of different ways, right? Not
Mhm.
just, picking stocks or managing the investment performance. And don't get me started on AUM based pricing and how broken that is, and how it's not tied to value at all. You can deliver a lot of value to a family, and probably one of the most important aspects with Leaf Planner. So I really think, like, the more I learn about Leaf Planner, obviously I think it's really unique, but I just think it fills such an important gap. When you take a look at innovation on your product roadmap, just talking to you as a tech entrepreneur now, where do you see innovation coming from? How do you balance innovation with other functions? And obviously, it wouldn't be a Wealth Tech podcast if we didn't have a chance to talk about AI and how AI is impacting your business.
So I think so. Innovation for us, or the roadmap, I'll say that because I'm not sure I want to call it innovation at the moment, but I'll get to that, I guess, on the AI side. On the roadmap side, we had a pretty good. Again, obviously, this comes from somewhat 25 years of my own experience, or even 35 if I include some of my law practice in there and things like that. And so we had a pretty good understanding of what we wanted this thing to do. But that's never going to end. Or there's always something else to add to it, or things that change, or things that are different in different regions of the world, and those kinds of issues. So there's roadmap that's just about the product as we come up with it. Our clients are obviously a huge source of feedback, right? It's a great feedback loop to be able to
Yeah.
listen to your clients and say, okay, that's a great idea. Let's go do that. And then there's regulatory changes. A couple of years ago, we were really focused on making sure we were ready for the Corporate Transparency Act, and we adopted some stuff within the platform to deal with the Corporate Transparency Act. And personally, I'm not convinced it's really dead. So we'll see, what
Right.
happens uh, later in this administration or the next, and whether the CTA comes back. So there's those kinds of roadmap issues, and then there also are, just constant. Obviously, as I'm learning now as a tech entrepreneur, there's constant new technology coming out, and how do we integrate with other systems? And when I go back to your question about the B2B side, the B2B side is very interested in how does this integrate with the rest of my tech stack, right?
Yeah.
Because they're already using a portfolio aggregation system, they're using a CRM, they're using a document management system, they're already using these disparate pieces, and we have to be ready to say, okay, this is how you're going to integrate this into what you're already doing. So integrations are a big piece of where that innovation is going. And then,
How is it AI impacting? What do you have
yeah,
any
the,
plans?
the AI question is definitely out there. I mean, for us,
Yeah.
in fairness, I'm going to say honestly, at the moment, there's not a lot of it going on in the system. I jokingly like to say our AI is human intelligence being built by our concierge team, which is
There you go.
a group that works with our clients. But there's definitely going to be application of AI, whether that's document ingestion, document summarization. And ultimately, where I'm actually really excited is we envision, maybe as early as later this year, but we'll see where this comes up, is that your leaf plan ultimately becomes, I may use the words wrong, but ultimately becomes your family's own private small language model or large language model, whichever the right terminology is. And you'll be able to query your leaf plan and just be talking to your leaf plan to say, hey, tell me about this, tell me about that. Maybe even having conversations with your ancestors that are stored, if all that data is stored in your leaf plan, being able to have a conversation with past Josh and all these things. So we're pretty excited about where it's going to go. I think we're not as excited about, we have to make sure that we can use the words in conversation, but we are excited about where it's going to go.
Not worried about trying to get a 10x multiple by slapping
We are
AI in
not.
the name of Leaf Planner AI
Exactly.
or whatever. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I think you just want to do it right where it makes
Yeah.
sense. It's not this be all. I do think in terms of, document interrogation, summing large amounts of unstructured information, being able to have a conversation with your data. Hey, can you find that will for me, or can you tell me about how this asset transfers, or whatever it is that to have a normal language conversation with, and it figures out where that data is
Yeah.
and does that for you is really powerful. We had a chance to be on a panel together for the Family Wealth Report around post implementation best practices. And we thought revisit that a little bit. How can firms better adopt new software? And then how has Leaf Planner kind of increased client adoption? You've talked about your concierge service,
Yeah.
but you could just tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, and I'm not, I would say, certainly an expert in this, and that panel was a lot of fun to hear different perspectives on it. I think the difficulty with adopting a lot of these things is becoming an expert in them, right? And if you don't have the personnel to become an expert in them, I think the post implementation review question is sort of dovetails nicely with the in-housing or outsourcing of some of these different things. So, some of these systems are so complex and constantly being added to. I mean, even with Leaf Planner, we're talking about a roadmap, right? We're constantly adding
Yeah.
things. Now, I would argue Leaf Planner is ridiculously simple to use, but it still takes time and effort to stay on top of what's coming out and what the new features are and things like that. So I think as people, families or family offices or firms look at insourcing or outsourcing some of these technologies, that's got to be something that they're thinking about. And how do we come back on a post implementation review basis and say, is this meeting our needs? Do we understand how this is being developed? And how do you do that? And some firms don't offer that implementation service. And so you're really relying on your own personnel or outside consultants to do it. So one of the things Leaf Planner did very intentionally, for a host of different reasons, not just because of this, but again, we built this internal concierge team or implementation team, whatever you want to call them. And they work alongside every advisor, every family member, and are really there to say, hey, this is how you can best get this out. So if we have a real estate family, then they're going to say, well, we've worked with dozens of real estate families. This is how they've approached it, doing this, a private equity family, or this or that, or whatever. So it's been, I think, a real benefit for Leafplanner to have that team who's been seeing all these different implementations and work with families and firms to be able to say, this is how we see you get the most value out of this, and do that on kind of a post implementation basis as well. But I think, yeah, people have to really think about how do you stay on that education curve with software and all the things that are changing, and how you're going to get the best value out of what we're doing, especially because change is hard, right? I mean, shifting systems, if you all of a sudden see something over on your right that wasn't, you don't think is in the system you're using, but making that kind of shift is really, really complicated, costly, time consuming. And so the more that you can be on top of what your own systems are doing, obviously the better that is. And I think for some of the smaller firms like us, it's great to know that our clients can come to us and really do get, a service level of being able to say, hey, we'd like to see you do this, and we can go do it. And that's important to us.
I think, you have the benefit of obviously seeing multiple family offices and having that true best practice, what works, what doesn't work, where obviously family office, they're not going to be implementing systems, especially Leafplanner, and they're not, that's going to be an implementation of one for them. They
Yeah.
don't have a chance to see these multiple reps. They have obviously limited resources and a high complexity portfolio to be able to manage the services that they provide to the family. And like you said, change is just hard. I don't care what it is. It's just a human component to it. And often that it has nothing to do with the technology vendor. Sometimes it's just the change management component of it. Is your staff ready for the change? Do they understand why that change is going to take place? Also, to your point, I think, it needs to be managed, and you need to be engaged with your vendor to be able to say, hey, am I doing things right? Am I getting the
Mhm.
most out of the system? What's new with you guys? Let me explain what's new with us so you can better serve us, and to just be engaged as a partner with your vendors. I think a partner relationship is always much better than a vendor relationship.
Yeah,
And having that kind of mindset, because for the most part, you want to help your clients, and you want to help your clients succeed. The more value they get out of the system, that's a win for both sides, right?
for sure.
So, Josh, I'd love to end these Wealth Tech podcasts on a personal note with three questions that have nothing to do with Wealth Tech. I think with this one, I got a tough time kind of keeping it down to three, but um, you're from Chicago. I love Chicago, one of my favorite spots on the planet. What do you love about Chicago? What's a great spot somebody might not know about?
Mm. So I moved to Salt Lake City almost 25 years ago. And so it makes you appreciate the things that I've always loved Chicago, and I still do love Chicago. So I would say first and foremost, the restaurants. Food in Chicago is just amazing. In some ways, I even think it's better than New York. So
Really? There's a
really
take.
kind of, I think the food scene in Chicago is just incredible. Uh, Obviously, the architecture in Chicago is unmatched, and it's just a great city. And on the 3 good days a year, when you can look out over the lake and just really see how beautiful a city it is, it's really pretty spectacular. Really cool spot. You go down toward the Shed Aquarium, and you're sort of out a little bit jutting into the lake, and you can see the skyline in just a way that is just magical. And so used to go just park there and look at it. It was really,
It's certainly cool seeing the lake and then having this, skyscrapers behind you,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's quite a different view. I would highly recommend to anybody that the architectural tour that goes on the boat. I think that was, because it is really amazing city for architecture.
yeah.
You're an art collector. Um, What are some of your favorite art museums? And I'll throw another one in there. If I was to go to the Art Institute in Chicago, like, how do I get the best? Because it's so big.
It's
How
so
do I do
big.
my Ferris Bueller's Day Off in that museum and get the best experience?
That's a great question, and I don't even know if I know the answer to that. I mean, you might, have to pick what you're really into. If you're into contemporary art, making sure that
Yeah.
you're going to the contemporary wing. The Art Institute's a hard place consume in a day. Um, but certainly in Chicago, I would say the Art Institute is got to be at the top of the list. And there's so many little gems around the world. I'm such a huge fan of the Albright Knox Gallery up in Buffalo. It's just like this little gem sitting in the middle of nowhere. Not that Buffalo's in the middle of nowhere. Sorry, any
Yeah.
Buffalonians listening.
Certainly want to
Um,
think about going to Buffalo for an art museum, but yeah.
uh, one of my kids was studying in Europe this summer, and we went over to visit and took him down to the south of France. And I had actually been there before, but it's a little town called Antibes, and there's a beautiful Picasso museum sitting on the water. And it's just these little places all over the place. There's another town down there that has a whole Leger museum, and the entire museum is a Leger mosaic on the outside of the museum. I mean, there are just so many great places. As long as you kind of ask around and are open to these smaller kind of non. I mean, I love the Art Institute, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's easy to go find these little kind of off the beaten path places that are just gems in the art world.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's great advice. All right, Josh, I appreciate you being on the show. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate being here.